So I want to thank Bhakti Swami for giving a very stimulating and very amazingly interesting presentation on Kirtan. Can't wait to hear tomorrow's presentation. My particular topic is preaching, and so we've been exploring the different aspects which are quite broad. What is preaching? How can we become more and more connected with the preaching movement of the ISKCON society? And yesterday we spoke on one verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the Lord explains to Candramauli, Kapila Muni is speaking to Kardama about the importance of giving fearlessness to the conditioned souls. And he says that's the highest form of charity, is to award fearlessness, because everyone in this world is suffering because of anxiety, which is due to unfulfilled desires, and therefore they're always struggling with various types of anarthas. And fear is the overriding mood where people are always fearful of not gaining, fearful of losing. So to award fearlessness means to teach people the principles of what is material, what is spiritual, and how to differentiate between the two, and how to live a life connected with one's identity as a spiritual being. And so in that particular purport, which is from the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear how Prabhupada goes through the whole purport. It's a quite lengthy purport explaining what we can do to preach Krishna consciousness, and he gives a very practical outline for those in Grihastha life. And he makes it very simple. He says, if you're a Grihastha and you're initiated by your sannyasi spiritual master, then you have a duty, he uses that word duty, to invite others to your home, have kirtan, distribute prasadam, and speak on scriptures such as Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada emphasizes that point, and he says that unless we actually take up the mood of giving Krishna consciousness to others, we remain on the lowest platform of spiritual practice, which is called neophyte platform. And the whole movement of Krishna consciousness, started by Srila Prabhupada and expanding, is based on the second class platform to give Krishna consciousness to others. And Prabhupada was very enthusiastic in making this point by saying that everyone in this movement should take up this preaching movement. And I'll read something Prabhupada says here. He's a good preacher. This is Prabhupada speaking. He's now distributing books very nicely. You're also a good book distributor. In the beginning she was distributing nicely, so preaching is our life. The more we preach, the more we are successful. Yari deke kahi kaha yari deke kahi kaha Krishna upadesh amara gyana guru hoy tara edesh. So Lord Chaitanya actually said that, and Prabhupada is making this point that our movement really centers around becoming Krishna conscious and giving Krishna. It's twofold. So in the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he demonstrated this process in a very practical way by giving instructions to certain individuals. And one such person was the Kurma Brahma from Kurmakshetra. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling in South India, he stopped at, actually he was invited by this one Brahmin called the Kurma Brahman. The Kurma Brahman was so much overwhelmed by the presence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he wanted to do some service being very humble and being very devoted, he invited Lord Chaitanya to come to his home. And please stay there, accept prasadam, and be our guest. The Lord was really impressed by the Karma Brahma's devotion and his humility, especially, and he dedicated his whole family for 4 days in serving the Lord. They washed the Lord's feet, they performed arti to the Lord, offered nice gifts, garlands and sandalwood, and also regularly gave the Lord nice prasadam. The Lord was very happy by their devotion, blessed the entire family. But then what happened was, it was time for the Lord to move on. As he was traveling, it was that time. And so, when he was starting to leave, the Karma Brahma said, my dear Lord, there is no limit to my great fortune. Today my family, birth, and riches have all been glorified. The Brahmin begged Lord Chaitanya, my dear Lord, kindly show me favor and let me go with you. I can no longer tolerate the waves of misery caused by materialistic life. So now, after having served the Lord, he wants to leave everything and just go to the Lord. This is his mood. Lord Chaitanya was not so happy to hear that, and he replied, don't speak like this again. Better to remain at home and chant the holy name of Krishna always. Prabhupada said, it is not advisable in the age of Kali to leave one's family suddenly, for people are not trained as proper brahmacharis and grihastas. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised the Brahmana not to be too eager to give up his family life. It would be better to remain with his family and try to become purified by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra regularly under the directions of the spiritual master. This is the instruction of Lord Chaitanya. Now, the Lord, after making that statement, he went on to say, and he said, instruct everyone to follow the orders of Lord Krishna as given in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. In this way, become a spiritual master and liberate the land. So he's giving a formula for how to practice Krishna consciousness according to one's ashram, and at the same time be an instrument for the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised the Brahmin, your materialistic life at home will not obstruct your spiritual advancement. Indeed, if you follow these regulative principles, we will again meet here, or rather you will never lose my company. This is a powerful statement. The Lord said, you want my company, you want to come with me, you want to leave everything. This is not pleasing to me. But if you really want my company, do this formula. Stay home, chant with your family, and whoever you meet, tell them about Krishna. Whoever you meet, instruct them to chant the holy names of the Lord. And then he said, this way your materialistic life will never obstruct your spiritual practice. Very interesting point. Sometimes we think, oh, I have to change ashrams in order to actually become effective as preaching. No. Lord Chaitanya, in this particular example, this is the most outstanding principle that is being, an outstanding example of the principle that he's trying to teach, is that just stay within your ashram and use your ashram to be an instrument. And he said that is very simple. Whoever you meet, tell them about Krishna. Whoever you meet, teach them to chant Hare Krishna. And then he said, by my command, be Guru Seva. So it's not like, I think we all know this, but it has to be emphasized because Lord Chaitanya is asking all of us to do the same thing. For those of us who live in grihastha life and have families and responsibilities and occupations, we need to take time to do this also, because this is real grihastha life. To show compassion to others is the principle of Krishna consciousness. Without that, Krishna consciousness doesn't really develop fully. One who seeks their own, as Maharaj was making that point, one who seeks their own spiritual life and is not so much interested or very inclusive in their own spiritual life, can never really taste the happiness of Krishna consciousness. Why? Because the order is there. It's our line, the cyclic succession. All the acharyas have come simply to give Krishna consciousness to others. And Prabhupada is the prime example of that. And he's asking each and every one of us to do that. And Prabhupada goes on, this is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Every one of you become guru and deliver the residents of your neighborhood. Adesh. Wherever you're living, just deliver. Become their guru. How to become guru? It's not difficult. Yari Kahi Krishna, Kahi Krishna, Krishna Kahi Kahe, Krishna Upadesh. What Krishna has said, instruct them. You simply repeat. That's all. You become guru. This should be preached all over the world. You learn Bhagavad Gita, repeat. You simply say, Krishna says four things, Manmana Bhavamat Bhakta Mamyaji Mamamaskuru. Just think of that. Become my devotee, offer your worship, and offer your obeisances to me. So Prabhupada sums up by using this verse from Bhagavad Gita what it means to preach. I mean, it's not like, oh, I have to have great philosophical knowledge of Shastra in order to somehow or other make a difference in people's lives. No. Preaching can be done in different ways, but the most important thing is one has to have this desire. If we have that desire, Krishna will inspire the devotee and give them intelligence how they can preach. And Prabhupada makes it simple. Just become a devotee of Krishna. Just chant Hare Krishna. Nowadays, when you tell people to chant Hare Krishna, it's not as hard as it was years ago. I'm seeing in our country, especially in America, our country anyway, we use that word loosely. In America, people are more receptive to the Hare Krishnas than ever before. I think for two reasons. One, they were waiting for us to go away, and we haven't gone away. And we're only getting bigger, so there must be some validity to what we're doing. We're looking better than ever in terms of more moving into mainstream society and becoming like them, but still devotees of Krishna. And people are coming to our Rath Yatras, to our festivals more, just like in our Rath Yatra. A couple of years ago, we had one of these booths where we offer people an opportunity to learn how to chant Hare Krishna. And so there was one devotee, he stays in Washington District. His name happens to be Mahamantra. So that's his service, is he sits there and he has these little mantra kits with a book on chanting, set of beads, and some literature on how to actually, learn how to chant. But he gives instructions and people come. In one Rath Yatra in Washington, D.C., we had 2,000 of those sets distributed to people. 2,000 just in one Rath Yatra. So people are curious to hear a little bit more. Why? Because I think there's a certain distaste in society where people are kind of like, we've tried so many things. Let's try this. It might work. And of course we've been around for a while, so we look good. And they were just waiting for us to leave. Like every other group that came in the 60s, so many groups came in the 60s. This group, that group, this one. And many of them just came and went. And some of them went underground. But only our movement is actually becoming more and more mainstream and more, what we say, acceptable to people in general. Sometimes I walk in airports and people say, Hare Krishna. Just coming here. I was standing in line and some lady turned around she had two kids with her. She was with another lady. She said, can you tell my kids what your dress is about? I said, we're the Hare Krishnas. She said, I know that, but what does your dress mean? So she wanted to explain to her children to make them feel good about, the guys behind us. So, we did our best. We said, this is what we do in our temples. Yes. Who is? Oh, you made it harder for me, thank you. You're supposed to make it easier, not harder. So, yeah, and Prabhupada goes on, and I'll continue reading. So he makes the formula quite simple. Just tell people to chant Hare Krishna. And I think our confidence in what we have makes the biggest difference in getting people to really accept what we say. If we feel unhappy about what we're giving them, or feeling that they might not accept it for whatever reason, it makes it hard for us to be enthusiastic to give what we want to give them. So we have to have full confidence that what we're giving them is the best thing that they can receive. And with that enthusiasm, as Maharaj was saying, enthusiasm is the life of bhakti. And then it becomes easier and more natural for people to accept something, in a general sense. But because we have the product and the enthusiasm, we have the product, that's for sure. The enthusiasm has to be coupled with that. Otherwise, if we don't believe, just like Prabhupada was saying he was talking a little bit about book distribution. And this was in 1976, and Prabhupada was in Mayapur. And he was kind of just berating his disciples a little bit about you're out there distributing books, and if someone asks you what's in the book, and you say, well, our teacher, he writes and we sell, that's all. Prabhupada said, no, you have to not only give them, you should be able to explain what you're also giving. And that brings conviction to what you're doing. So to inform this message is not difficult, not at all. You carry the message. If he is fortunate, he will do it. So Prabhupada said, if that person is fortunate, if Krishna says in the heart, you listen to this person, or you actually take a book, then that person becomes fortunate. Even if he does not do it, you are carrying the message. You be recognized by Krishna. So here's an interesting point. Prabhupada is saying, even if you're apparently unsuccessful, it's only apparent. Success is in the endeavor, not in the results. We want the results. We definitely want the results, but even if, I used that example yesterday, or I mentioned this one incident, where in the early days of the Krishna conscious movement, the devotees in New York had arranged for a big program for Srila Prabhupada, and they rented a hall. The hall had many seats. There was about a couple hundred seats in this hall. It was like an auditorium. And they had put flyers around different places in New York City. They even tried to use whatever little bit of influence they had in media. And Prabhupada was billed as, a Swami from India speaking about God and self-realization. So, when it came to the time, 7 people came. And the place was huge, and the devotees were feeling so unhappy. But Prabhupada preached like there were 700. He wasn't the slightest bit, daunted by the fact there wasn't so many people there. And those 7 people were really interested. Later on, the devotees came to Prabhupada and said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, we feel so bad. We tried hard, hardly anybody came. Prabhupada said, what do you mean? No one came. Narada Muni was here. Did you see? Of course, the devotees didn't have the vision that Srila Prabhupada had. But Prabhupada made the point that any endeavor to preach is successful. He said, even if nobody comes, speak to the four walls. That's Bhakti Siddhanta. But Prabhupada would repeat that. So, it's not like, what is our qualification for preaching? Srila Prabhupada's instructions. That's our qualification. On another lesson, we'll go into some of the ways that we can actually use the element of preaching in order to distribute the message. There's so many ways you can preach. But I will talk about that in a practical sense. This is more like just establishing the mood. And Prabhupada says, even if he does not do it, in other words, does not accept what you're saying, you become recognized by Krishna. Think about that. You become recognized by Krishna. That's not a small thing. That's not a small thing. You get recognized by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But here's the way. Simply make an effort to bring Krishna consciousness into the lives of those who are, you say, needy, unfortunate. He says, you are doing sincerely, then you are recognized by Krishna. Just like a canvasser, salesman, goes to the market. He tries his best to secure some business. The master sees the report, how he has worked. Even though he has not secured a single type of business, but he has tried to introduce the goods, then he becomes bona fide. He becomes bona fide. Prabhupada repeats it. Similarly, we have to simply carry the message of Krishna and try to convince people. Convince, it is good, doesn't matter, I'm not going, then you are recognized by Krishna. Recognition means you become the dearest servant of Krishna. Then what do you want more? I said, what do you want more? If your life is perfect. If Krishna recognized that you are the most dear servant, then what do you want more? He says it again. And he repeats Lord Chaitanya's message. So Lord Chaitanya gave the formula, simply make an effort. And Lord Chaitanya, although he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we don't read so much that he was actively preaching Krishna consciousness, but he was mostly spreading it through the kirtan. But there are a few interesting episodes within the Shastras where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually was doing preaching work. And one was with the Buddhists. When he was traveling in South India, he came across a group of Buddhists, and a discussion ensued. And Lord Chaitanya took the arguments which are the foundations for the practice of Buddha and took them one by one and distributed each one of them. Would you like to hear the dialogue? Is it too rainy to hear? Okay. Seems we're getting a little bit of mercy. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, according to the Buddhist cult, this is from Chaitanya Charita, there are two ways to understand philosophy. One is called Hinayana, and the other one is called Mahayana. Along the Buddhist path, there are 9 principles. The creation is eternal, therefore there is no need to accept a creator. Point 2, this cosmic manifestation is false. 3, I am is the truth. This is what Lord Chaitanya came in contact with. 4, there is repetition of birth and death. 5, Lord Buddha is the only source of understanding the truth. 6, the principle of nirvana or annihilation is the ultimate goal. 7, the philosophy of Buddha is the only philosophical path. 8, the Vedas are compiled by human beings. 9, pious activities showing mercy to others and so on are advised. So Lord Chaitanya took apart all of those 9 principles one by one and established the actual siddhanta of the Vedic conclusion. So, I mean, if we were up against something like that, we might find ourselves in a great, test. But Lord Chaitanya helped us by giving us how to deal with such philosophy. And it actually goes on. Should I read the responses to those 9? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all going to become Buddhists if I don't read the response. We have nothing against Buddha. We have something against the philosophy. So it says, no one can attain the absolute truth by argument. One must be very expert in logic, and another person may be more expert in the art of argument. So by argument, one cannot come to the right conclusion. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. We got it? Okay. So, the first principle is that the creation has always existed. That's the first thing. Therefore, there's no need for a creator. Creation is eternal. But if this were the case, there could be no theory of annihilation. The Buddhists maintain that annihilation or dissolution is the highest truth. If the creation eternally exists, then there's no question of dissolution or annihilation. This argument is not very strong because by practical experience we see that material things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The ultimate aim of Buddhist philosophy is to dissolve the body. This is proposed because the body has a beginning. Similarly, the entire cosmic creation is a gigantic body, but if we accept that it always exists, there's no question of annihilation. If the creation always exists, our body is always created, and they also say that ultimately the body is annihilated. So they actually contradict themselves. Therefore, to accept, to annihilate everything in order to obtain zero is absurd. By our own practical experience, we have to accept that there is a beginning to a creation, and when we accept beginning, we have to accept the source of the creation, which is a creator. And then the creator must also be a person. And that's part of the further argument. The Buddhists argue that the world is false, but this is not valid. The world is temporary, it is not false. As long as we have a body, we must suffer the pleasures and pains of the body, even though we are not the body. We may not take these pleasures and pains very seriously, but they're actual facts nonetheless. Everybody knows that. Okay. Just like the Zen Buddhists, they say, they take a stick and they hit you, and they say, there's no pain. The idea of your experience of pain is simply an illusion. And then you have to create this mindset that this pain that I feel feel is not really real. Okay? Can you work with that? But pain and pleasure are part of the material body. And so as soon as we accept the material body, we have to accept pleasure and pain. So the body is not false, it's simply temporary, like everything in creation. We cannot say they are false. Excuse me, the Buddhists maintain that the principle I am is the ultimate truth, but this excludes the individuality of I and you. If there's no I and you, or individually, there's no possibility of argument. So they say, okay, I am is the ultimate truth. What about you though? You don't exist, just I. Everybody's an I. The Buddhist philosophy depends on argument, but there can be no argument if one simply depends on I am. There must be a you or another person. The philosophy of duality, the existence of the individual soul and the super soul, there has to be two. All of existence is based on opposites. So even in the spiritual realm, just like there's a statement, why does the jiva, I'll ask you this question, why is the jiva created? Or why does the jiva exist? Can't say creation. He's part and parcel of Krishna. Obviously, we hear that, we understand that, we accept that. But why does Krishna have to have a jiva who falls under the influence of the material energy and apparently has to suffer material existence? When Krishna has so many living entities in the spiritual world who are eternally his parts and parcels, and he has loving relationships, and they never come to the material world. What is the principle of a jiva? It's actually related to this point. I was searching for months before I finally found it in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Why do we have to have this living entity that falls under the influence of a greater energy, apparently, or a more powerful energy, the material energy, and has to suffer? God, people say, God is so cruel, this is what he does. Yes?
Because he wants to be loved, he wants to love, and there's no love without independence.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of people, spirit souls in the spiritual world who are his eternal associates who never come to the material world. Why have another aspect of that same element that can flow from grace?
I think the question is based on a false premise that there was a time. We're talking about eternity, but the question is based on the sense that there was an episode where Krishna was thinking it's maybe a good idea to have jiva that love me or something like that. But the jivas are eternal.
Right.
They always existed simultaneously with Krishna. So they've never been.
I'll tell you the answer. The answer is not Leela, it's Tattva. The answer is in the Tattva category, not in the Leela category. It's not in the relationship category.
Yeah, right. We've always been there with Krishna.
Yeah, but then why? Because it's actually...
But why even asks, that assumes that at some point they weren't there. That why.
Yeah, that's why it's not Leela. It's Tattva. But what is the element of Tattva that explains the existence of the jiva?
No.
Okay, we got two hands. Go ahead.
Maharaj, we studied that at some point we became envious of Krishna and we wanted to inquire independent of Krishna.
Yeah, well, that's why we come here. We have our free will, and as Shruti Kirti Prabhu mentioned, the principle of love is based on the principle of individuality and individual choice. So misuse of that. Well, why create, or why not create, but why have an aspect of the absolute truth that can fall into that element and then suffer? Why do we even need this whole material world?
Said that the living entity never loses his choice. Never. Even if those who are Nityasiddha technically have the choice to come to the material world, they just don't make that choice. So actually, it's the jiva's choice to come here.
Yeah. Well, why even have a jiva that makes the choice?
Well, you said there are living entities that you love, but they're also jivas.
Well, Krishna has his eternal associates who never come to the material world. You know, his those who exist in it, his mother, his father, his eternal associates, the gopis, those who are a part of the absolute truth, who don't come to the material world. They just don't. They won't. It's an element of the absolute truth. All right, I'll give the answer. The answer is, the absolute truth has to have both infinite and finite qualities. Otherwise, the absolute truth is not the absolute truth. It has to have both infinite and finite, and the jiva is the finite aspect of the absolute truth. Therefore, the absolute truth becomes complete when it has both aspects of finite and infinite.
But are you saying that the jivas who are in the spiritual world are not finite?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Are you saying, by that statement, are you making this assumption that the jivas who are in the spiritual world are not finite?
No.
Because they didn't fall down, so we fell.
But Krishna has his eternal
We're
associate.
finite, but they're not falling. So
No.
what makes the difference between us and them?
I'm using Krishna's eternal associates, those who are in his eternal entourage.
But they're not finite, those jivas?
But we become part of his eternal entourage when we go back to the spiritual world. Because we were Nityasiddha.
But they're Nitya. No, they're Nityasiddhas.
Nityasiddha again, Prabhupada says that in the books.
We're Nityasiddhas. I mean, they're Nityasiddhas.
No, but Prabhupada said we're Nityasiddhas also, we just are forgetting it.
But the quality of the jiva is the same. The quality of my jiva, my soul.
I think I need the Chaitanya Charitamrita to answer
Although I've forgotten my position, and someone has not forgotten, there's still the same quality of the jiva. It's not there's different jivas,
But
different grades of jivas.
Well, we're questioning the principle of why that has to be, where there is an element of that the living entity has the opportunity to fall.
That's freedom. That's just freedom. That's not a variety of
Yeah,
jivas.
yeah.
It's just the freedom. Because to love, you have to have freedom. Otherwise, there's no question of love.
You know, when people criticize and say, well, God is so cruel, he allows you to suffer.
No, he allows you to choose whatever you choose.
Okay. Let me get the shots again. It's in Chaitanya. Does anybody have a Chaitanya Charitamrita? Okay.
We're all bowing down to his point.
Give me the verse in
Chapter 7. Chapter 7, verses 1, chapter 7 of Adi Lila, 116.
7, verse 16?
116.
Oh, 116.
I hope I'm right.
Yeah, you're being recorded there,
Okay. The verse is, the Lord is like a great blazing fire, and the living entities are like small sparks of that fire. Purport. Although sparks and the big fire are both fire, and both have the power to burn, the burning power of the fire and that of the spark are not the same. Why should one artificially try to become like a big fire, although by constitution he is like a small spark? It is due to ignorance. One should therefore understand that neither the Supreme Personality of Godhead nor the small spark-like living entities have anything to do with matter. But when the spiritual spark comes into contact with the material world, its fiery quality is extinguished. That is the position of the conditioned souls. Because they are in touch with the material world, their spiritual quality is almost dead. But because these spiritual sparks are all Krishna's parts and parcels, as the Lord states in the Bhagavad Gita, Mamai Vamsa, they can revive their original position by getting free from material contact. This is pure philosophical understanding. In the Bhagavad Gita, the spiritual sparks are declared to be sanatana, eternal. Therefore, the material energy Maya cannot affect their constitutional position.
Try 113. Okay.
113?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my reference right.
Only get 2 chances.
Okay, the verse is, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is full of spiritual potencies, therefore his body, name, fame, and entourage are all spiritual. The mind-body philosopher, due to ignorance, says that these are all merely transformations of the material mode of goodness.
Mm-hmm. Is there a purport?
Yes, it's a purport.
Mm-hmm.
In the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has classified his energy in 2 distinct divisions, namely Prakrita and Aprakrita, or Para-Prakriti and Apara-Prakriti. In the Vishnu Purana,
No, it's the very first line in the purport, so obviously that's not it.
That's not it.
Try 66.
66?
766.
766.
And what does the first line say?
It poses that question, why does there
No purport to 766.
we did one,
There's a lecture given by Prabhupada.
no, 113 we did, and 116 you did, right?
Yeah.
Look in that area, and the first line in the purport is the question is posed. 115, try that. Yeah. I think that's the area.
It's funny. This particular, it goes from 114 to 116. 115 is missing in this. You got it? Okay. Purport, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami explains that the variegated personal feature of the absolute truth is the Vishnu Tattva, and that the material energy which creates this cosmic manifestation is the energy or Vishnu. Is that it? No.
I can't remember the verse. It's in that, try 166.
166. Okay.
Yeah.
No purport.
Hmm. I'm sure it's in that area, but I can't remember the verse. The first line of the purport says, it poses the question, what is the purpose of the jiva soul? It actually makes a statement.
Does it say it poses the question?
In the beginning of the first purport,
It says words?
it poses the question, why is the absolute truth contained in the jiva? If the jiva, of course, can fall.
He has to be Bhagavan and Anu. He has to be Bhagavan and Anu. Anu, the smallest particle, and Bhagavan.
Yeah, that's the answer, that the absolute truth has both infinite and finite qualities. That's the answer. But I don't remember the actual reference.
But to me, it's not clear the point we were trying to make in relation to those who are in the spiritual world and those who are in the material world. Because both are finite. Both are parcels of Krishna. They're not Bhagavan. They're all atoms. They're all.
The point is that there are living entities in the spiritual world who are Krishna's eternal associates who don't come to this material world, such as his.
But the question, are they can't or they don't?
Mother Yasoda, Nanda Maharaj, Krishna's intimate associates, and there's unlimited amounts of those.
My understanding is that they don't, not that they can't. That-
They just won't.
Well, that's good.
They choose not to. Eternally choose not to.
Yeah, because
Because isn't the like Shalakamshila and Tulsi, they come, you know, they, Radharani sometimes, I mean, she's reluctant to come, but she
Well,
comes.
no, I mean, those who come under the influence of the external energy, that's the type of coming we're speaking about. Not those who, like Srila Prabhupada, we know he's an eternal associate, who came in as a messenger on behalf of Krishna. So he's an eternal associate.
But then we get into the whole conversation that some are manifested in the Brahmajyoti, some are, you know, and so on.
Well, that's another, I'm not gonna touch
That's a whole
that.
debate, where does ultimately,
That's not even discussable because there's no end to that. We can't find it, huh? I'm sorry. I was sure it was 116 or 115, 113 in that area. Okay, anyway, we'll go on. I'll find it next time.
Yeah, I checked the beginning of every report from 102 to 122.
It's not there. 66 doesn't have
Yeah, and then I can go maybe from
65, 66. It's Adi Leela, chapter 7 for sure. No? Okay. Anyway, we'll go on. According to the Buddhist fifth principle, Lord Buddha is the only source for the attainment of knowledge. And then, this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's statement. We cannot accept this, for Buddha rejected the principles of Vedic knowledge. One must accept the principle of standard knowledge because one cannot attain the absolute truth simply by intellectual speculation. So they reject the Vedas and say Buddha is the only source, but then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says they reject Vedic knowledge, and therefore they're left with speculation. That's basically the answer for number 5. So Lord Chaitanya took each one of these principles apart, and then after defeating the Buddhists were unhappy, so they tried to make revenge. So they wanted to act like everything was okay, so they brought Lord Chaitanya a nice plate of prasadam. It wasn't nice, it was all contaminated food. And it was a big iron plate that the food was sitting on. And they said, here, this is for you, we want to offer this nice food to you. Now, Lord Chaitanya, he's there, the plate's being offered. A big bird flies in, a huge bird, grabs the plate, picks it up in the air. As he's picking it up, all the contaminated food is falling all over the Buddhist. And then the bird drops the plate. The plate falls on the head of the head Buddhist and knocks him unconscious. And then, you know, all the chelas of the Buddhists, they get all, and they thought, oh, our leader's killed. So they run to see what's happening to him. And they're all like crying, he's unconscious. And Lord Chaitanya says, just chant Hare Krishna in his ear. And so he gets all the Buddhists to chant Hare Krishna. And then the Buddhist leader comes back to consciousness. So not only did he defeat them, but he actually converted them and got them to chant Hare Krishna. So I just wanted to bring out this thing and to show how Lord Chaitanya dealt in different situations with different people. With the Mayavadis, when he came to the assembly of the Mayavadis, he approached the whole thing in a different way. They had been criticizing Lord Chaitanya for chanting and dancing in the street with a bunch of sentimental people. And the word got back to Lord Chaitanya's followers, who were his associates, and they were in complete distress that the Lord was being criticized. So they wanted him to do so. Lord Chaitanya didn't want to bother with the Mayavadis, but then, okay, to pieces. He came to their assembly. There's 60,000 Buddhists in Benares at the time. It was a group in this one room. Prakasananda Saraswati was the head Buddhist. Lord Chaitanya, he came and he simply sat by the door. And he just remained quiet. They noticed him. And then they invited him to come in. And then they questioned him. Why are you chanting and dancing with these sentimental persons? You are, you're a sannyasi. And then, of course, Lord Chaitanya had mentioned that he was accepted sannyas from the Bharatis, the particular sampradaya from Keshava Bharati. And they said, you're just becoming a sentimentalist. And Lord Chaitanya, he could have, defeated him, but he didn't. He said, my spiritual master said, I am not intelligent enough to understand philosophy, Vedic philosophy. He said, just chant Hare Krishna. So he kind of praised him in one sense, but actually he was being somewhat facetious, or what we say, he's turning it around. But then he said, my spiritual master said, you're a fool, just simply chant Hare Krishna. And then the Lord explained a little bit about chanting, but what attracted the sannyasis, or actually they were all sannyasis practically, because in Mayavadi Sampradaya, you're required to take sannyas, and then you can actually practice spiritual life. That's their whole thing. So, but Lord Chaitanya's body was so beautiful that he emanated this effulgence, and he acted so humbly. And by his humility and by his bodily beauty, he attracted their attention and their confidence. And then he got the chance to explain. And gradually he started to explain the whole philosophy of the difference of oneness and difference. And then the absolute truth is the supreme personality of Godhead. And after hearing his explanation, and also the explanation on the glories of chanting the holy names of the Lord, all the Buddhists, headed by Prakasananda Saraswati, all the Mayavadis, headed by Prakasananda Swami Saraswati, became devotees. He converted all 60,000 Mayavadis. So he didn't really go in there in an argumentative or debative mood as he did with the Buddhists. But with the Mayavadis, he simply remained humble, and by his persona, they were ready to listen. So this is just to make a point, aside from this wonderful pastime. The point is that there is different tactics that can be used according to a situation to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness according to time, place, and circumstances. Like one time, Prabhupada was speaking about, on Varnashram Dharma, he was speaking about the 4 classes of men: first class, second class, third class, fourth class. And Prabhupada was, after there was some questions, and it was a student audience, and the students were a little bit, challenging. So one student got up and said, "You think you're first class." That's the first thing he said to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada remained silent for a few seconds, and then he said, and he actually became a little emotional, and then he responded, he said, "I am fourth class. I'm simply trying to serve those who are first class. That's all." Fifth class. He said, "I'm fifth class, not fourth class." Yeah. I'm certainly trying to serve the 4, thank you, for the 4 other classes. So that captured the sympathy of the audience, and everyone could understand how I was actually just exhibiting natural humility. So that's another tactic. So this is just to use different understandings out, and with preaching, there's different tactics. With Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, one Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya saw this beautiful sannyasi coming into the Jagannath temple and falling unconscious simply by seeing Lord Jagannath. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was fascinated and had the sannyasi taken to his home, and then Lord Chaitanya came back to consciousness. And he was thinking, oh, this sannyasi is so wonderful. I should teach him the philosophy of Vedanta. And so he, after hearing from Gopinathacharya, who was Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's son-in-law, who was also an associate of Lord Chaitanya, he decided, all right, I'm going to teach this sannyasi in Vedanta. And Lord Chaitanya was, okay, you are superior, you are recognized, you're a great soul. Let me hear the lesson. I can learn something. This is God learning. And for 7 days, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya spoke Vedanta philosophy. 7 full days. And then went on for hours each day. At the end, Lord Chaitanya didn't say a word the whole time. Didn't even ask a question. Didn't even interrupt. He listened. And then Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, you know, you're listening for 7 days. I can see you're listening, but you're not asking any questions. Is everything all right? Do you understand what I'm saying? And Lord Chaitanya, then he came on. He said, actually, Vedanta is like the sun. It's clear, it's bright, it's luminous. But your understanding, your explanations are like clouds covering the sun. So he gave him a chance to speak everything, and then when everything was spoken, then the Lord just dismissed everything with one statement. And being a great scholar, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, all right, let me hear your explanation. And for, I don't know how long I'm not sure how long it was mentioned, but actually for an extended time, Lord Chaitanya explained the whole science of the absolute truth as the Chinta-Veda-Tattva and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all existence. Establishing Krishna as the absolute personality of Godhead. And he converted the greatest of all scholars at the time, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So these are just nice examples to see how Lord Chaitanya approached each of these different little classes and used a certain technique in order to bring about. And of course, the ultimate principle is he always spoke the absolute truth at the end, like that. So getting into the audience or approaching an audience is an element of expertise that can be used in Krishna consciousness. Sometimes devotees preach and they just distribute prasadam. And people say, what is this food? How is it made so nicely? And then you can speak, oh, it's offered to God. That's what makes the taste so wonderful. And then you have an end to speak philosophy. So using different techniques or different avenues to somehow bring Krishna consciousness. So the principle is somehow or other become an instrument for Lord Chaitanya's mercy for others. And this is actually an edict that we're being given by Srila Prabhupada and by the previous acharyas. So imagine if every devotee in our ISKCON movement was actively engaged in some form of preaching, how fast this movement would spread. How fast this movement would spread. I mean, there are devotees who are doing so many things, and there's also, we need cooks, we need, drivers, we need, there are various other aspects of service, but the mood of preaching within the mood of the service is actually what makes the service actually a form of outreach. Just like those who are painting the wonderful pictures of Krishna in the spiritual worlds, it's a form of preaching. If their mood is to bring people attention to Krishna in this particular way, that is also preaching. Preaching is quite broad, but it's the mood that really counts, the mood of outreach, rather than the mood of my own personal advancement. So the mood has to be more of trying to think in terms of how to reach out as opposed to how to get my own advancement in Krishna. It's just changing the moods, that's all. It's not about changing the service so much. But if the service is required to change according to situations, then we can do that. Okay, any questions? Yes, Prabhu.
2 questions, Maharaj. So the first question was, you explained a few different situations and scenarios and different approaches. And the question would be, how do we understand which strategy to use at what time? One. And the second question was, wasn't it a breach of etiquette for Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to try to instruct Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?
Yeah, that's what Gopinath Acharya chastised his father-in-law. He said, you're trying to instruct him, but he's God.
No, I mean even socially, because he was a sannyasi.
Yeah, but Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya thought he was doing a great service. He felt that this sannyasi, he's nice, but he needs to learn, the ultimate truth. So he was actually thinking of helping this sannyasi by giving him this knowledge. So, but yeah, there is somewhat of a breach in etiquette, but his mood was to give. Sarvabhauma Acharya was actually a very respectable, very gracious person. He wasn't a hard Mayavadi, but he was afflicted by these impersonal conclusions. We got Maharaj, yeah.
Well, my understanding about Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is that he's a senior person. He looked at this sannyasi, very young, super in his 20s. I thought, I don't know, maybe he's a little green beyond the ears, and I can help him a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe the sentiment wasn't not harsh or arrogant, but it was really out of a sentiment.
It was almost like fatherly.
Yeah.
He was quite elderly.
There was that age difference, and naturally, somebody much older will think, there's somebody young and not so experienced, maybe I can help him.
And he felt that Lord Chaitanya would make it.
Was it what?
Lord Chaitanya was so young, he probably would make it. And he wanted to convert him from the stage of Bharati to Saraswati. Because there are different levels of sannyasa. Mayavadi, so he wanted to bring his education to a much higher level where he could be acknowledged as a Saraswati rather than just a Bharati.
Yeah, Lord Chaitanya did something. He broke a few of the traditions. One, he took sannyas quite young, and that was also mentioned. Even Prabhupada was criticized for giving sannyas at such a young age. Because usually you go through the system where after retirement from household life, then you go to sannyas. Or if you stay in brahmachari life, you mature in brahmachari life. So it's not something that is done in your youth, generally. It's something either middle age or old age, generally after 50. So Lord Chaitanya broke that. And that's when Prabhupada was criticized for giving sannyas to so many young Americans, Europeans. Prabhupada also pointed to Lord Chaitanya. And it was also the need at the time.
Could it be said that, when Lord Chaitanya was preaching to the Buddhists and defeating their arguments, they went away sort of not defeated? And it really required a miracle almost to sort of get them all to become, devotees and chant Hare Krishna.
You mean by dropping the plate on
And the
that?
plate and knocking them unconscious and then reviving them again by the mantra. Whereas with Prakasananda Saraswati, it really was sort of, coming in like a pin and going out like a plow, very gently coming in, humbly coming in, and preaching in such a way that they became convinced. So it's almost, it seems like the message is there maybe that it's going to be very difficult to convince Buddhists, but impersonalists you may have an in.
Yeah, he got their confidence for the impersonalists. The Buddhists, he went right for their philosophy.
Right, but they didn't become convinced. They really couldn't.
No, they weren't convinced.
Sympathetic to Vaishnava because he was one of them. The Prakasananda was very sympathetic to Vaishnava because he felt he's a sannyasi, Mayavad sannyasi, so they felt a little sympathetic. Well, he's just a little bewildered, but maybe we can help this poor fellow.
Yeah,
So it was more of a, well, the Buddhists are completely a different thing, that they didn't relate to Vaishnava in that level.
Yeah, it was completely different. Yeah, that's a very clear point to see the distinction between the two groups. Although their philosophy is quite similar.
Well, actually, Prabhupada said the Buddhists are more honest because they reject everything. Well, the Mayavadis, they pretend, but they reject it, but in an indirect way. So they're more hypocrite. But the Buddhists are more honest.
Yeah, well, Prabhupada said they're more envious. They're envious because they say, soham. They take that statement out of the Shastra, soham. I am that. I am that. That means the absolute truth. So although soham is, I am spirit, not that I am the Supreme Spirit. That's how they interpret that word, soham.
But Prabhupada also makes a distinction between the Kumaras and the Mayavads.
Yeah.
Because the Kumaras didn't know, when you don't know about Krishna, you're coming from that intellectual platform and the Dhyan platform gradually, but because they weren't envious, when they understood us, the incense of different descriptions, they took the Krishna consciousness. While the Mayavadis, they know about Krishna, but they don't accept Krishna, they're trying to become Krishna.
Yeah.
And so there's a subtlety in those two categories of impersonalism. There's Mayavadis
And Brahmavadis.
Yeah.
They were called Brahmavadis. That means they thought that the absolute truth, the highest aspect of the absolute truth was Brahman. But when they heard higher knowledge, because they were not envious, they accepted that. Where the Mayavadis make the point that this is the ultimate print, there's nothing higher. And they use the example that if you say person, you limit the absolute truth, because a person is something that is within a particular form, and therefore all-pervading is more inclusive. Therefore the absolute truth has to be inclusive, therefore all-pervading is the absolute, the highest principle of the absolute truth. They're envious, that's all. Yes, Siddhanta Prabhu.
Can we go back to the first question, Maharaj?
A reporter asked Srila Prabhupada, he knew something about India and its culture. He said to Prabhupada, isn't it true that most people that take sannyas are old? Why are you giving sannyas to young people? And Prabhupada said, what does it mean to be old? The reporter had no answer. Prabhupada said, old means about to die. Can you say that you're older than me? Do you know that you might die before me? And he again had no answer. And Prabhupada said, that's why we're giving them sannyas.
Interesting. That's an interesting point. That reporter had to have some intelligence to understand that one. I guess he did. Because most people would reject that idea that most people who don't have the intelligence. That we see the general trend is generally people live to a certain age, but that's not the guarantee. That's not the guarantee. This is good. I think even devotees don't even accept this idea. That, I'm young. I got all my plans, I'm gonna enjoy first, and then, then later on, I'll get real serious about, practicing Krishna, although I believe it. We find that even, well, it's just an element of youth that comes with that age, that you just think, yeah, there's so much time. I'll get serious later. Nice point, thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
I think, Prabhu, did you have your first question?
The first question, Maharaj.
Oh yeah, I forgot what it was.
The first question was, we have so many different strategies and approaches, and I was wondering if you could maybe summarize in some way how to detect which approach is the best. How to detect? In which situation?
Yeah, he wants to know, how do you know ahead of time your audience so you can adopt a particular means to reach your audience? I guess part of the answer would be experience. To try different things and see what works. You may not always get it right the first time, but by the trial and error. And see how the audience is accepting what you say, or not accepting what you say. I think it's a little bit of experimental, also hearing from others who have had that same experience by describing, the audience, how best to reach this audience. You've done this, can you help me? A little, preparing ahead of time. It's not always foolproof. You have to try.
There's a class, I forget which one, but Prabhupada is preaching, and the man is saying, so what about sex life?
Prabhupada said, what about it?
And Prabhupada gets into a whole thing about, so he kind of alters his train of thought, and he just gets into all that. So sometimes you have to adjust to the audience, like you're saying.
Yeah. I think, I don't want to sound, arrogant, but it takes intelligence to preach. You learn by mistakes, or you learn from hearing from others, and you learn by successes.
And you learn by your failures.
Huh?
You learn more from your failures, probably.
You really learn from those, because the tendency is to forget your successes, and the failures really have a stigma attached to it.
Well, Prabhupada would often say that it requires common sense. We often have that expression.
But Prabhupada, I have no common sense. Prabhupada said, then get some.
He also said, then ask somebody.
Yeah. But I don't even know who has common sense, so who am I supposed to ask? Maharaj, yeah.
He had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
So my question, I guess, revolves around who we're preaching to, and as your class did as well. But specifically in my case, I was wondering about preaching to people who are already involved or have been involved in some manner in Krishna consciousness. In other words, like how to boil the milk. Because doing these in preaching endeavors where you're distributing lots and lots of books is wonderful. But then you can think, how many people in Toronto have received a book? And maybe haven't been cultivated? Or how many people even have come to our temple, chanted, or even taken initiation, and then left because maybe we're out there trying to preach to more people, but we aren't necessarily preaching to those who've already received something. So
the question is how to boil the milk? That's the question.
Is there anything that maybe we could do better to reach those who have come in some way and then left? And is that like a worthy audience?
You're looking for a topic that could be more relevant to stabilize our effectiveness in our preaching? I mean, we usually spend most of our time preaching to the choir. I mean, that's us. But what is the most effective way to elevate or to strengthen our society from within?
Well, yes and no. I do understand what you mean. Like, preaching to the choirs happening right here, right?
We always do that.
We're always doing that every morning, we're doing that all the time. However, there's like, what about the choir who have left the building?
Oh.
People who have like taken initiation and maybe then they're just kind of out.
Trying to somehow or other reach people who have gone away.
Yeah, I don't see any specific initiatives that are caring for that audience in particular.
Yeah, I think before you can get an in with those people, you have to establish a relationship. To establish a relationship, just like we tried this in New Vrindavan, we had a large group of people who were living around the community. They were Prabhupada disciples who are no longer active, but they were still there. So what we did is we had different devotees just go over their house and sit down and say, how's the family? You know, is there anything we can do? Maybe we can help you clean your house. In other words, we just offered some personal association with no, what we say, preconceived ideas of trying to bring this person back. It was just establishing relationship, and we left it at that. And this friendliness, this openness, this more or less concern for individuals seemed to bring a little bit of a better communication between the devotees. That's one way we found a little bit effective, and then in some cases that made them more come around more, and just because the GBC in 1996 did a survey for why do people leave the movement. And it's a 1-year survey, and they came up with 3 reasons. And the first one, not really developing meaningful relationships between devotees. That was the number 1 reason why devotees. We have a large group, but we're kind of like just a bunch of individuals together. We don't really establish enough relationships with other devotees based on, activities in Krishna consciousness. Taking time to talk to devotees, making friends with devotees, sharing Krishna consciousness with devotees, that's also an element of preaching. So because of that, we lost a lot of people. They just felt alienated, or they didn't feel like they could. And a lot of them, they found this kind of friendship and this kind of relationships with people on the outside. They found it was easier to do that. And so that's happened. And the second reason was Grihastas could not somehow or other maintain their Grihasta life and at the same time practice Krishna consciousness, so they felt like they had to go outside of the society, become less active, and establish their Griha. That was the second reason. And the third reason was using brahmacharis as fundraisers. Put them back in the fruitive mentality of trying to make money. So these were the 3 reasons that they had come through a survey why devotees become less and less involved in our, temple activities. Yes, Marge.
We just think that it's quite simple. Because the word preach implies, I'm going to throw some philosophy out at you. But people don't want that most of the time.
You're talking,
that's when you're comfortable, but
talking
people just
down
want
to
friendship, be human with me, show me some real emotions, show some concerns, and then you've won them over, you've got a friend.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're putting them you're putting yourself in a position of superiority, and that a lot of times that blocks relationship. Then preaching is there, but it has to be done in a setting where preaching is the means to do it. Otherwise, it's more or less, if you're told to preach and you have to preach, people come, you can hear. If people are in trouble and say, Maharaj or Prabhu, come give me some advice, I need some help, then you can speak something. But generally, it's more what you said. Relying on friendship or relationships. Yes,
what did the GBC do with those results?
I'm not sure. That was part of the 1996 centennial initiation. Well, I think one of the outcomes was the devotee care system, which came not too long after that, in the beginning of 2000. Then they started actually doing the devotee care system. You know, that was one of the things that came out of it. And then GBC established a committee, a devotee care committee. That was part of it. I think Lakshmi Moni can speak a lot about that. She was involved with that.
The romantic committee was formed, GBC in 2006. Came together and was asked, what do you think the movement needs? And they came up with 6 or 7, it turned out to ultimately to be 18 different things that we needed to work on, and devotee care was one of them. And then when we came, well, actually it came out as outreach. And then when we started talking about outreach, we realized that just what we're talking about, that we take care of the people outside, but we don't take care of the people inside. And so when people come from our outreach, they walk away because they don't feel that they can join the community and be welcomed. And so that outreach turned into devotee care. And now devotee care is trying to figure out, because there's a lot of different devotees who need a lot of different kind of care. And so it's a very, very variegated effort. And they're trying to figure out how to provide care for so many different. The first thing they came up with is a course on devotee care for leaders. And that's starting to be proliferated, but there's more, tons more to do.
Yeah, that's just the beginning. Having a course and then what's included in the course.
And getting people to have the time to take the course is also a problem.
Yeah, well, it's developing more and more. Healthcare is also a big part of devotee care also. Mayapur is doing that now, actually establishing a health program for devotee care.
I think I found the purport you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
It's verse 116.
Yeah.
But the part that you're talking about is not at the very beginning of the purport, it's kind of in the middle of the purport.
Okay.
The verse is, the Lord is like a blazing fire, and the living entities are like small sparks of that fire. And the second paragraph starts, someone may argue why there a need to create the spiritual sparks.
Yeah, that's
it?
That's it.
Okay, they're talking about all the spiritual sparks. They don't really differentiate between Nityasiddha and Nityabhata sparks.
Okay.
It says, the answer can be given in this way, since the absolute personality of God is omnipotent, he has both unlimited and limited potencies, meaning himself and the jiva. To be omnipotent, he must have not only unlimited potencies, but limited potencies also. Thus, to exhibit his omnipotency, he displays both. The living entities are endowed with limited potency, although they are part of the Lord. The Lord displays the spiritual world by his unlimited potencies, whereas by his limited potencies, the material world is displayed. And it goes on from there. But I think that's
the one I said, 116. We just didn't read far enough in that purport. Yeah, it's tattva. That's the point. It was all based on tattva. But when we got into this argument with some senior devotees, and I won't mention names, but they were also saying that Krishna has his eternal associates in the spiritual world. And those eternal associates never fall down. Then why have the aspect of the jiva that can fall?
But even the ones that never fall can fall. That's the key. They choose not to, but they can.
They have independence, otherwise they're just slaves.
Well, this point was made, maybe mistaken. Okay. Well, thank you for bringing up that. I think it's, a prayer is about ready to be made. It starts with Sadhu Ra. Is that right? We can do that. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing that last point up. So we'll continue with preaching tomorrow in another aspect. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Holiness Candramauli Swami ki jai. Thank you, Maharaj. So now lunch is being served. So it's downstairs. Please join us. Thank you.